Virgin girl Lily Carrington never imagined her wedding night would end in silence and coldness. Married to millionaire James Whitmore, a man as distant as he was devastatingly handsome, she entered a mansion of secrets, untouched, unloved, and full of hope. But one stormy night, everything changed. The grand halls of the Whitmore estate echoed with silence the night Lily Carrington became Mrs. James Whitmore. The marble floors stretched endlessly, as cold and polished as the man who walked them. Fireplaces burned in every room, but no warmth lingered. The chandeliers sparkled, but the light was distant. Everything in this mansion was beautiful and empty, just like their marriage. James Whitmore, the mysterious millionaire known for his power, his looks, and his reclusive life, stood stiff in his black suit even after the guests had left. Not a hair out of place, not a word spoken more than necessary. He didn't look like a man who had just married a beautiful young woman. He looked like a man fulfilling a business agreement. Lily stood in her wedding gown, untouched, her hands folded in front of her, her heart pounding. She had spent the whole day smiling politely, standing beside a man who barely glanced at her. Every guest had whispered, "Why her? She's so young. Does he even like women? He hasn't danced with her once." She had ignored it all. She had told herself this was a start. Maybe James just needed time. Maybe he was guarded, careful with his emotions. After all, he had lost so much: his parents, his trust in people. She had heard the rumors about the woman who had broken his heart long ago, and how he'd built walls ever since. But she wasn't her. Lily was different. She was raised with kindness in a small countryside town, where people still believed in love letters, late-night walks, and lifelong promises. She believed in healing. She believed in love. She had said yes to this marriage, hoping to be the warmth in his cold world, hoping to bring life into this lonely mansion. But after the last toast, the last farewell, the last flicker of music faded into silence, James turned to her with a voice like ice. "We will share a house, not a bed." Lily blinked, her breath caught. I, I don't understand." He stepped away, unbuttoning his cufflinks with measured calm. "This is a contract, Lily. My aunt wanted me married. You needed stability. We both got what we came for." "But what about us?" she whispered. He paused for just a second, and that pause almost gave her hope. Then he turned his back to her. "There is no us." She stood there in her wedding dress, under the high arches of his mansion. She had never felt smaller. Her wedding night, the one she had imagined since she was a child, was now reduced to a locked door and fading footsteps. He went to his wing of the house. She was shown to her own room by a maid who avoided eye contact. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. The gown still clung to her body, heavy with dreams that would never be fulfilled. She had waited. She had saved herself. Not just physically, but emotionally. Her heart had always been guarded, waiting for the one who would treat it gently. And now she was married, but untouched. Wanted, only as a signature on paper. The clock ticked. Thunder rolled in the distance. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she stood, walked to the tall window, and looked out across the vast estate. Rain had begun to fall. The wind bent the trees. Somewhere in the dark, a hawk cried out. The world felt wide and empty, like her heart. In the west wing, James sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. He stared at the fireplace, the flames dancing, but he felt none of their heat. He could still hear her voice. "But what about us?" It had shaken him more than he showed. Her innocence, her eyes, the way she looked at him as if he was worth saving. He didn't deserve that. He couldn't take that risk again. He had loved once, fully, blindly, and it had nearly destroyed him. So he built a fortress. No love, no touch, no entry, especially not for someone like Lily. Sweet, soft, untouched. She deserved gentleness, and James had forgotten how to be gentle. He downed the scotch and leaned back. "She's safer without me," he whispered to no one. But far away in her lonely bed, Lily whispered back to herself, "I just wanted to be loved." Morning came, and nothing had changed, except a single rose appeared on her breakfast tray. No note, no words, just a soft red bloom, trembling like the hope she still carried. He wouldn't touch her, but he was watching. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't made of stone after all. The mornings came softly at Whitmore Manor. Golden light filtered through tall windows, spilling over polished floors and casting a warm hue across cold stone. But the warmth didn't reach the hearts inside. Not really. Lily Carrington, now Lily Whitmore, awoke each day in a room far too big for one person. The bed never felt slept in. The sheets never tangled. It was all too perfect, too lonely. And James? James began each morning long before dawn. He was always gone by the time she reached the breakfast table. A single chair filled, the other empty, a silver teapot, a folded newspaper. A rose sometimes, but never him. Their life had become a pattern of silence and glances. She heard his footsteps echo through the hallways, measured and calm. She saw the flicker of his shadow under the study door. He passed her sometimes in the halls with a soft, "Good morning," but never stopped, never touched, never stayed. At times, she wondered if she had imagined that stormy wedding night. Not the passion, but the ache of it, the quiet heartbreak in his voice, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his eyes held secrets he refused to share. They lived like ghosts in a mansion full of life. The staff adored Lily. She brought sunshine where shadows had lived for years. She wore flowing dresses in soft pastels, always smelling faintly of lavender and vanilla. She helped in the kitchen, much to the cook's horror. She played piano in the afternoons, drawing curious smiles from the maids. She fed the swans in the lake. She tended to the roses. But in the quiet moments, when no one watched, she stood by the tall windows and stared out across the misty gardens, waiting, wondering. Will he ever let me in? In his study, James stared at her through the rain-flecked glass, unseen. She was reading by the fireplace again, a novel resting on her lap, her fingers absently twirling a strand of golden hair. Her face was calm, but her eyes told another story, a story of yearning, of waiting for a man who wouldn't come, and it twisted something in him. He noticed everything, how her lips trembled slightly when she smiled too long, how she always paused at his door before walking away, how she placed sugar in his tea just the way he liked, even though he never asked. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was kind, soft in a way the world had forgotten, and he wanted her, wanted to pull her into his arms, bury his face in her hair, kiss her like a man starved. But he didn't, because she was a virgin, untouched, pure, everything he was not. And if he let himself fall, if he touched her even once, he feared he'd lose all control. He feared he'd want too much. He feared that if she ever left him, he wouldn't know how to survive it. Lily tried to pretend she didn't care. She told herself that this was fine, that she didn't need a husband's touch to feel whole. She threw herself into small things, organizing books, learning how to ride horses, painting the garden in watercolors. But every night, she went to bed with her back to the empty space beside her and whispered his name into the pillow. James. One afternoon, she made him his favorite meal: roasted lamb, buttered vegetables, fresh bread, lemon tarts. She set it all up in the dining room herself. Candles, flowers, silverware polished to shine. She even wore a new dress. Pale blue silk, delicate lace around the sleeves, soft as a whisper. He arrived late, of course. He paused in the doorway when he saw her. The candles casting gold into her hair, the table shimmering like a scene from a dream. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to stay, to sit, to eat, to reach out. But instead, he said quietly, "You didn't have to do this." She stood slowly. "I wanted to." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not touch, but almost. He nodded, gave a stiff "thank you," and walked away. She sat down at the table, alone, the food going cold. The next day, she found a gift on her pillow, a book she had once mentioned she loved. A first edition, beautifully bound, no note, no explanation. But it was the first time she smiled in days. James wasn't cruel. That's what made it harder. He was kind, in quiet, ghost-like ways. He made sure she had everything. He answered when she asked. He listened when she spoke. But he kept his distance like it was life or death. Lily began to suspect it wasn't dislike or disinterest. It was fear. Fear of her innocence. Fear of what her touch might awaken in him. Fear that if he reached for her, she might disappear. She saw it in his eyes. So instead of pushing, she waited. But waiting was beginning to break her. Late one night, unable to sleep, Lily walked the corridor and paused by his study door. She raised her hand, almost knocked, but lowered it again. Inside, James was seated by the fire, a glass in his hand, watching the flames. He had felt her outside. He always knew when she was near, but he didn't move, didn't open the door, because once he did, he knew he might never let her go. They were two souls under the same roof, breathing the same air, living in the same silence. Two strangers, with hearts whispering the same question. How long can we stay apart before one of us breaks? The air that night inside the Whitmore estate felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken words, with quiet ache, with longing that had no voice. Outside, the wind kissed the windows gently, swaying the velvet curtains with each breath. Inside, a clock ticked steadily, unaware of the silent war between hearts on opposite sides of a door. Lily stood in front of her mirror. Her fingers hesitated on the silk strap of her nightgown. The fabric shimmered like moonlight, clinging to her delicate figure in a way that made her breath catch. Not from shame, but fear. Not fear of James, never of him, but fear of what she was about to do and what it would awaken. She had spent weeks in silence, waiting, hoping, but tonight, she needed to be seen, not for attention, not to seduce, just to exist in his eyes, as a woman, as his wife. She poured the tea herself, fragrant, warm, with a hint of honey, and placed it gently on a silver tray. Her bare feet touched the cold floor like whispers as she walked down the dim hall toward the library. The one place she knew he'd be. It was late. The house was asleep, but she wasn't. Her heart thudded against her ribs, wild and frightened, yet brave. This wasn't a scream. This wasn't anger. This was her soft rebellion, a plea, a moment of quiet courage. She pushed open the door slowly. The fire was low, casting amber light across James's face. He sat in his favorite chair, a book in hand, though he wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on the flames, and maybe something deeper beyond them. He didn't notice her at first, not until the soft clink of porcelain on wood. She bent slightly to place the tray on the table, and the silk of her gown shifted like water over skin, exposing the gentle slope of her bare shoulders, the curve of her back, the softness of her neck kissed by candlelight. Then her voice broke the silence, quiet, fragile, but certain. "You don't have to want me." She straightened and looked at him, eyes shining. "But please, don't treat me like I'm invisible." James's head snapped up, and for the first time in weeks he saw her, not just the girl from the countryside, not just the name on a marriage certificate, but Lily, a woman, his wife, soft, brave, heartbreakingly beautiful, standing there with a teacup and hope in her trembling hands. His breath caught in his throat. Her hair tumbled like gold over her shoulders. Her cheeks were dusted pink, not from blush but emotion, and her lips, parted, vulnerable, seemed to ask for more than words. His book slipped from his lap, and in that moment his mask cracked. Just a flicker, a tiny gasp of honesty in a world he kept sealed tight. He stood suddenly, too fast, and backed away, as if her nearness burned. His voice was rough, strained. "You deserve more than what I can give you, Lily." She blinked, once, twice. Her mouth opened, but the words died before they reached the air. James shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "Don't do this. Don't wait for something that isn't coming." Lily stepped forward, her voice barely above a breath. "Then tell me you feel nothing." He looked at her then, and the storm in his eyes told her everything she needed to know, even as his lips lied. "I'm sorry." He turned and walked out of the room. She stood frozen, The tea still steamed beside her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her shoulders didn't sag. Not yet. Only when the door clicked shut did the tears rise. Not tears of rage, not humiliation, but heartbreak. She hadn't come to seduce him. She had come to be seen, heard, held, even if just by words. But he had turned away again. And this time, something inside her cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked just enough to let the cold in. She walked back to her room with her arms wrapped around herself, silk brushing against her skin like a reminder of what might have been. She curled up in bed, blinking up at the ceiling as if the stars might answer her. What more must I give, James, for you to love me? Across the hall, James leaned back against the door he had just closed, his chest rising and falling like waves against rocks. His hands shook. He could still smell the lavender in her hair, still feel the softness of her voice in his bones, still see the shimmer of moonlight on her bare skin. And he hated himself, because he wanted her, more than he wanted breath. But if he touched her, if he opened that door, he feared he would never be able to close it again. He feared that loving her would ruin them both. He feared that she'd leave him once she realized how broken he really was. So he stayed away, not because he didn't feel, but because he felt too much. Lily didn't try again for many days, but something inside her had changed. She still smiled, still read, still painted and cooked and laughed with the staff. But her eyes didn't wait at the windows anymore. Her steps didn't pause outside his door. And that shift, that small silence from her, terrified James more than any words ever could. Because when she had begged for his love, he had turned away. Now that she had stopped asking, he realized he might lose her forever. The wind started as a whisper, a gentle sigh through the trees surrounding the Whitmore estate, rustling the ancient oaks and sending the golden leaves tumbling like whispered secrets across the vast lawn. But as the night deepened, the whisper became a roar. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and ominous, like a warning. The sky darkened, swallowing the stars whole. Lightning flashed, bright, jagged streaks tearing through the black canvas, followed by the sharp crack of thunder that made the very walls of the mansion tremble. Inside the grand old house, the shadows grew long and restless. Candles flickered, windows rattled. Lily lay curled beneath her thick quilt, her heart pounding in rhythm with the storm outside. She hated storms, always had. The first crack of thunder sent a shiver down her spine. She pressed her face into the pillow, trying to drown the noise. But then came the scream, a sharp, piercing sound. Hers, she couldn't stop it. The terror she had buried inside all her life rose suddenly, uncontrollable. The power flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room, heavy and cold. The house groaned. Somewhere outside, a tree snapped and crashed against the side of the mansion with a violent thud. Lily's scream turned into a sob. James was in his study when the lights died. The storm slammed into the house like a force of nature, and the darkness was complete. He heard the scream before he heard the crash. Heart hammering, he rushed down the hall, his feet pounding against the wooden floors, every instinct screaming. He found her on the floor of her room, curled into herself like a frightened child, trembling and tears streaking down her cheeks. Without thinking, without hesitation, James dropped to his knees and lifted her into his arms. The silk nightgown was cold against his skin. Her hair spilled like a golden waterfall over his arm. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, clinging as if he were her only lifeline. For the first time since their marriage, for the first time in years, James touched her. His fingers trembled. His breath caught. Her tears soaked through the front of his shirt, warm and real. He held her like she was fragile glass, precious, irreplaceable. He carried her carefully through the dark corridors, guided only by the intermittent flashes of lightning. The mansion that had always felt cold and empty suddenly felt alive, filled with the soft rhythm of two beating hearts. James placed her gently on his own bed, the bed he had refused to share since their wedding night. He pulled the blankets over her, tucking her in as if she were a child needing comfort. And then he sat beside her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. For hours he held her close. Her head rested against his chest. She could feel the steady pounding of his heart, strong and steady, and it steadied her own. His hands moved slowly over her back, tracing invisible patterns of comfort. Nothing more, nothing less. Outside, the storm raged with furious intensity. Winds howled through the trees, rain battered the windows, thunder shook the earth. But inside the bedroom, the only storm was the one building quietly. A storm of feelings that had been buried for too long. Her breath was soft on his skin. His heartbeat sounded like a promise in her ear. The warmth of her fingers against his chest sparked something deep inside him. Something he had thought dead. A longing so fierce it took his breath away. For Lily, the closeness was dizzying. She had dreamed of this, of touch, of warmth, of safety, but never dared to hope it would come like this. No demands, no pressure, no expectations. Just the simple, tender act of being held. She felt the tension in his body, the unspoken battles he fought within himself. And in that quiet, intimate space, something fragile began to grow. James's eyes closed as the storm outside echoed the tempest inside him. He realized how much he had denied himself, denied them, denied the chance to love. For years he had built walls to protect his broken heart, but now as he held Lily, warm, trembling, real, those walls began to crumble. The night stretched on. Neither dared to break the silence. Neither wanted to move. They were lost in the moment, in the storm, in the fragile beauty of the night that had changed everything. When dawn finally broke, soft and golden, James still held her close, and Lily's heart whispered a truth she had known all along. Sometimes love doesn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with a single, tender touch. The morning light spilled softly through the grand windows of Whitmore Manor, painting everything in hues of gold and pale rose. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean, fresh and full of possibility. Inside, the mansion felt different. Lighter, warmer. But James Whitmore wasn't ready to admit it. He dressed quickly, straightened his tie in the mirror, and tried to bury the memories of the night before, of the closeness, the softness, the unspoken promises held in his arms. He wanted to return to the cold, distant man he had always been, the man who wore his pain like armor. But fate had other plans. As James strode down the hallway, lost in his thoughts, a soft voice stopped him in his tracks. "James." He turned slowly. There stood Lily. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable, shimmering with a mix of hope and fear. She stepped closer, the pale morning light catching the gentle curve of her cheek, the shy curl of her lips. "You held me last night," she said quietly, "like I mattered." Was that real? James swallowed hard. He looked away for a moment, unsure, conflicted. "I don't know how to be gentle," he admitted, his voice rough. "And you deserve gentleness." Lily's heart fluttered, her breath caught. She moved even closer, until the space between them was barely a whisper. "Then learn," she said softly, "with me." The world seemed too still. And then James leaned in, slowly, deliberately. His lips brushed hers in a kiss that was at once tentative and desperate, a kiss full of longing and promises. It was a kiss that said, "I am here. I am yours. I want to try." That kiss was a turning point. It opened a door that had long been sealed, a door to trust, to hope, to something beautiful and fragile. James pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Lily," he whispered, "I'm scared." She smiled through her tears. "I'm scared too," she said, "but maybe we don't have to be afraid anymore." That night, the mansion was transformed. James lit candles throughout the rooms, their flickering flames casting a soft glow that wrapped around them like a warm embrace. He took her hand gently in his. The touch was electric, tender, reverent. He guided her to the sitting room where they sat close, the silence between them comfortable now, filled with something new. James traced the outline of her hand with his fingertips, marveling at the softness, the warmth. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and then, for the first time, he touched her like she was made of glass. Fragile, precious, deserving of care. Their breaths mingled. Time slowed. Words became unnecessary. He whispered love not with promises or declarations, but with lips, hands, and long, breathless moments. He kissed her neck, her cheeks, the hollow of her collarbone. Each touch was a vow, each sigh a confession. Lily responded with a heart open and full. She gave him her trust, her hope, her innocence. For the first time she let herself fall, not blindly, but with eyes wide open. The night deepened around them. Outside, the moonlight filtered through the windows, bathing them in silver. Inside, their worlds intertwined. The walls that once separated them crumbled. In their place grew a garden of tenderness and desire. James held her close, whispering promises into the quiet night. Lily rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a sound she had longed to know. Together they discovered the language of love, spoken not in grand gestures, but in quiet touches and shared breaths. By dawn, neither wanted to let go. They had crossed a line, from strangers to lovers, from isolation to connection, from fear to hope. And in that moment, under the gentle light of a new day, James and Lily understood that love wasn't something they could control or deny. It was something to be lived, together. The days slipped by like petals drifting on a slow-moving stream, gentle and inevitable. The grand halls of Whitmore Manor, once cold and shadowed by loneliness, now echoed with soft laughter, light, genuine, and full of life. James Whitmore was changing. It began with small things, the way he smiled, a real smile, no longer guarded or forced, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and softened the lines carved by years of pain. He began holding Lily's waist as they walked through the gardens, fingers lingering just long enough to say, "You are mine," without words. He kissed her shoulder softly as she read in the quiet afternoons, a gentle reminder that she was cherished, treasured. And then there were the wildflowers, unexpected bouquets of daisies, lilies, and tiny bluebells left on her bedside table. Each bloom a silent apology, a promise, a confession. Their nights together were no longer cold contracts or quiet endurance. They became sacred rituals. James made love to Lily not with hunger or desperation, but with his whole soul laid bare. Each touch was reverent, each kiss a prayer. He learned to read the language of her body, the subtle shifts of her breath, the moments when her eyes fluttered closed in bliss. And Lily, she gave herself to him fully, mind, heart, and body, knowing that in his arms she had found not just passion, but sanctuary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink, James took Lily's hands in his. His voice trembled, heavy with years of buried sorrow. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, eyes locked on hers. He spoke of the woman who had betrayed him, a love lost to deceit and cruelty. He spoke of the wounds he had buried deep inside, wounds that made him afraid to love again. Tears filled Lily's eyes as she listened, her heart aching for the man she was slowly unraveling. "James," she whispered, brushing her thumb over his knuckles. "Love isn't weakness." She smiled through tears. "It's healing." Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, comforting, steady. They faced their fears together. They let go of the past, brick by brick. And when the time came, 6 months after their quiet wedding night, they renewed their vows. But this time, it was different. This time, it was by choice. The ceremony was held in the blooming garden outside the manor, the same garden where months ago they had stood as strangers bound by duty, uncertainty, and silence. Now they stood as lovers, soulmates, partners, hands intertwined, eyes shining with love and promise. James looked at Lily, the woman who had transformed his world. "No contract," he said softly. "No conditions. Just us." Lily smiled, her heart full. "Just us," she echoed. They kissed, slow, tender, full of everything they had been through and everything they would build together. The crowd was small, just a few friends and family who had witnessed their journey from the beginning. But the love between James and Lily filled the space. A love that healed old wounds, broke down walls, and defied the odds. Their story was no longer about a cold marriage or a broken man. It was about hope, about courage, about the power of love to change even the most guarded hearts. James and Lily learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day. It's about forgiveness. It's about growing together through storms and sunshine. And as they danced under the stars that night, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that the greatest treasure they had found wasn't money or legacy. It was each other. A love that healed. A love that lasted. A love that changed everything. This is not just a story of a millionaire and a virgin bride. It's the story of a broken man learning how to love, because a brave, gentle woman taught him how. Because sometimes it only takes one stormy night to turn a contract into a real forever.